They sent him in a shimmering vessel that refracted starlight like a living prism, escorted by a fleet of ceremonial cruisers. Ambassador Telvis of the Galactic Council, keeper of peace, broker of treaties, and witness to 1,000 diplomatic triumphs, set out for Earth with confidence drawn from centuries of uncontested success. His arrival was to mark yet another quiet assimilation of a new species into the benevolent structure of galactic civilization. The humans, he'd been assured, would comply after the proper ceremonies, a few veiled threats, and the usual political dance. He believed this. He believed it with the certainty only a species untouched by real fear could possess. He was wrong. Earth shimmered below as the ship descended, the planet's blue and green hues appearing almost innocent compared to the metallic sprawls of the core worlds. From orbit, it looked underdeveloped, vulnerable, the surface dotted with outdated infrastructure, clunky fusion grids, scattered megacities, and relics of obsolete military satellites. A forgotten corner of the galaxy, perfect for quiet induction. Telvis spent the descent reviewing psychological assessments and cultural profiles. Humanity was categorized as an anomalous Type 1.7 species, barely interplanetary, emotionally unstable, burdened with mythologies and tribal conflicts. They'd seen thousands like them. The analysts claimed humanity was held back by its biological aggression and fractured governments. This made them manipulable, exploitable, ideal. He skinned historical footage of Earth's past, tribal wars fought with sticks, then steel, then fire. Global destruction followed by rebirth, followed by more destruction. He chuckled when he reached the section on nuclear armament, marveling at how such a young species had flirted with extinction multiple times, seemingly by accident. The Council assumed that history like this bred submission, that they'd welcome order. And yet, despite the predictions, Telvis felt uneasy. Not afraid, no, not yet. But something gnawed at him as his ship broke through Earth's stratosphere and entered the waiting corridor of welcome. The humans had requested a landing site in a quiet valley surrounded by trees and hills. It was rustic, symbolic, they said, a gesture of humility. But the trees had grown around strange shapes, stone bunkers, antennas hidden as rocks. Telvis noted them but said nothing. Earth's air was rich with oxygen and carbon scents, organic, alive. He found it strangely intoxicating that the welcoming delegation met him with perfect smiles. Not over-eager, not groveling, just polite, calm, too calm. Their faces were symmetrical, expressive. Their voices soft, even melodic. Yet Telvis couldn't shake the sense that he was being measured with every word he spoke. Not studied, like a diplomat, but like a subject, a specimen. They led him to a meeting hall constructed from native wood and metal, a strange blend of natural and industrial. Human leaders sat at one end of a table carved from petrified forest. It bore ancient markings, unintelligible yet purposeful. Their language, their customs, all seemed primitive on the surface. But the timing of their responses, the layers of hidden meaning in their idioms, it was too refined to be accidental. As the ceremonial greetings proceeded, Telvis noticed a pattern in their language, redundancy, repetition, but not due to lack of vocabulary. It was as if they were layering meanings beneath the surface. Words wrapped around other words, smiles that weren't smiles. Their eyes never quite matched the expression on their faces. Later that day, he was taken on a tour of Earth's great cities. In Tokyo, he watched thousands of humans move in perfect synchronicity, guided by unseen signals. In Nairobi, children played with old combat drones modified into toys, reprogrammed with ease. In New York, a skyscraper blinked a message in quantum-coded light. His ship's sensors picked up only because they'd been set to maximum sensitivity. A message not meant for him, but a test, a calibration. He attended a human museum of history. The exhibits were brutal, trenches soaked in mud and blood, helmets shattered by railguns, cities rendered to glass. The docents explained it all without apology. Not with pride, but with precision. "We remember," one said, pointing to a wall etched with millions of names. "Not because we must, because we choose to." That night, in his private quarters aboard his ship, Telvis reviewed the footage. He froze on a shot of a child in the crowd, no older than 7, holding a teddy bear. The child had looked directly into the drone's optical sensor and smiled, not a warm smile, a knowing one. A smile that whispered, "I see you." He requested access to Earth's neural communication systems, citing diplomatic protocols. The humans granted it immediately, too easily. Within minutes, the ambassador's interface was flooded with data movies, books, music, games, memes, war logs, comedy reels, propaganda, horror, satire, and something labeled simply, Training Archive. Unrestricted. He backed away from the screen after 3 minutes. The humans had dumped their entire cultural psyche onto him. Unfiltered. There was no way this species didn't know what they were doing. Back in the diplomatic hall the next day, Telvis sat across from the human delegate. A woman in her 40s, sharp-eyed, casual. She poured him tea, Earth tradition, she said. He sipped it. Bitter, warm, comforting. "You know," she said, stirring her own cup, "you remind me of our early astronomers. Always looking out. Never imagining something might be looking back." Telvis didn't respond. She leaned forward just slightly. "We've seen what the Council does to new species, the gifts, the codes, the adjustments. You measure us by what we lack. You see chaos where we see options. You see conflict where we see practice." Telvis blinked. The cup trembled in his hand. "Ambassador," she said softly, "are you sure you came here to evaluate us?" And for the first time in his diplomatic career, he wasn't sure. Asterisk, the Council ship above Earth shimmered quietly in orbit, but inside, the atmosphere was strained. Ambassador Telvis moved through the observation deck like a ghost, reviewing data logs while his attendants offered calming reassurances. The humans had not refused diplomacy. They had welcomed it, smiled for the cameras, shaken hands. But beneath it all, there was something dissonant. Something impossible to define in charts or sensor readouts. The humans were not behaving like any species the Council had ever encountered. "Status on the cultural analysis packet?" Telvis asked without turning. "Still incomplete, Ambassador," one of his aides replied. "The volume is extreme." How extreme? Over 2 million discrete cultural artifacts transmitted within the first hour. And more are still being received. Telvis narrowed his eyes at the rotating globe below. A species that overloaded its own cultural signal intentionally was not trying to communicate. It was trying to conceal. Bury the truth in noise. Bury it deep. He returned to the surface 2 days later, this time to a different facility in what humans called Iceland. The site was labeled a peace research center, though Telvis noted the presence of underground structures his scanners could not penetrate. When asked, the humans smiled and said, "Oh, just geothermal backups. You know, in case the lights go out." But the shadows told another story. Thick blast doors hidden behind moss. Heat signatures in the ice. Movement that didn't match local fauna. They walked him past stone circles and strange monuments. One bore a single line in an ancient Earth language. The translation took 2 seconds. "Do not dig deeper unless you're ready for what was buried." The words weren't threatening. They were instructional. A warning from one generation to the next. He met with a group of human scientists in a minimalist glass dome, surrounded by books, artifacts, and digital sculptures made from raw data. They spoke of collaboration, integration, exchange. They offered schematics of their energy systems, communication standards, and even a fusion variant unfamiliar to Council engineers. But when Telvis asked about their military infrastructure, they politely declined. We don't like to bring weapons into conversations, said one of them with a warm grin. We've learned it makes the other party feel insecure. The implication was not missed. That night, Telvas reviewed drone footage from the atmosphere. A Council stealth probe had gone missing 2 days prior. The recovery drone found it neatly dismantled and left on a beach in Argentina. Every piece catalogued, cleaned, and arranged in a spiral. The note left beside it read, "Don't peek unless you knock." Council protocol was to assume coincidence unless probability demanded otherwise. This demanded it. No species outside the Council had ever detected, let alone disassembled, a Type 4 stealth drone. The humans had done it without alerting anyone. More footage came in from their surveillance AI, which had been tracking human online behavior since arrival. Patterns began to emerge. Human net activity spiked around ambiguous topics. First, contact, xenopsychology, and strangely, paranoia humor. The humans weren't panicking, they were amused. Satirical videos began circulating of aliens trying to civilize Earth and promptly being outwitted by children or attacked by birds. It was all so casual, so playfully mocking. At first, Telvas believed this to be cultural friction, humor as deflection. But then a deep scan of the content's metadata revealed embedded signals, mathematical keys, resonant harmonic patterns, and in one case, a fully functional decryption cipher, buried in a cat video. The humans were encoding strategic data in jokes. The war room laughed at themselves. By the 5th day, unease had turned to dread. Council ships conducting deep ocean scans began reporting phantom readings. One cruiser in the Indian Ocean descended beneath the surface for sample retrieval and came up. Altered, its logs were wiped, its internal navigation redrawn. It now moved as if piloted by something other than its crew. The commanding officer, a battle-hardened Virak captain, requested immediate reassignment, citing presence anomalies. Telvas demanded a personal inspection. Upon entering the cruiser's main control chamber, he found something carved into the wall. Human writing. Not vandalism, but calligraphy. Old Earth script, deep and elegant. You're not the first. You won't be the last. He turned to leave and realized every reflective surface in the ship had been removed. Windows, monitors, anything that mirrored, gone. Replaced by raw walls, dull metal. Not destroyed. Removed deliberately. He returned to the surface once more. This time under personal guard. The humans had said nothing about the incident. Nothing at all. That silence felt louder than any protest. At the Geneva Accord Center, he met a young girl during a public relations walk. She held his hand with no fear and asked him where his people kept their monster stories. Monster? He asked. Yeah. She said, giggling. You know, the ones that wait. The ones that smile. The ones that act nice but are really just pretending. He looked down at her. You think we're monsters? She shook her head and gave a toothy grin. No, she sighed. You don't smile right. Later, as the day ended and the skies above Earth turned a color the Council didn't have a name for, Telvas stood outside his ship and watched the clouds ripple unnaturally. There was a pattern in their motion. A code, even the weather obeyed. A rhythm that didn't match the models. He finally sent a restricted message to the Council Corps. One sentence only. Their danger is not in their weapons or history. It's in what they choose not to show. And deep below the Earth's crust, beneath dormant silos and cities built in quiet waiting, something ancient stirred. Not as a defense, but as a reminder. The Emergency Council convened in orbit above Earth, its members drifting weightlessly around a flickering holomap of the planet. Ambassador Telvas stood at the center, silent, his fingers trembling just slightly behind his back. Around him, high-ranking analysts and security directors whispered with growing unease. The tension was no longer theoretical. Earth was no longer a curious anomaly. It was a live threat, Counselor Vihas of the Taruan leaned forward, his tendrils twitching. Are you suggesting the humans deliberately deceived us during first contact? Telvis didn't blink. No, I'm suggesting they never once pretended to be anything other than what they are. We simply refused to see it. A murmur rippled through the chamber. No one interrupted. Telvis gestured, and the ship's AI replayed footage captured from the diplomatic vessel's neural core encrypted files, not part of the standard analysis. It was a security recording taken during a private audience with Earth's Strategic Oversight Council. What appeared to be a routine diplomatic exchange was, upon closer review, a psychological feint of stunning precision. They didn't speak to me, Telvis said. They studied me. The room, the pacing, the acoustics calibrated. Every answer crafted to leave exactly enough ambiguity to provoke curiosity, not suspicion, and their language. It's not primitive. It's layered, recursive, built to deliver a surface message and hide deeper intent underneath. The council watched in growing disbelief as the human delegate in the recording, an unassuming older man in a gray sweater, asked a seemingly innocent question. Do your species dream collectively? To most, it would seem like idle curiosity. But the diplomat's phrasing had activated a cognitive reflex in Telvis's own species, an involuntary shift in memory patterns. It was a test, Telvis said. He triggered a dream state. Resonance, mild, harmless, but precise. They wanted to see how I processed emotional data under subtle stress. They watched me more than they listened. Vihas snapped his claws in frustration. Even if true, they have no serious technology. Their ships are crude. They haven't colonized beyond their moon. Telvis turned slowly, his voice quiet. They've had the capability for over 60 years, but they chose not to. The silence that followed was suffocating. He expanded the holomap. Orbiting Earth were several thousand civilian satellites, weather stations, and abandoned military platforms. But as the map peeled back deeper layers of classified council scans, new objects emerged, unidentified energy signals, silent constellations of cloaked platforms sitting dead in orbit, motionless. We initially classified these as space debris or failed prototypes, Telvis explained. But they're not dead, they're dormant and synchronized. They activate in patterns matching council fleet movements. We've been under surveillance since we arrived, an aide panicked. That's impossible. We didn't, because we assumed their technological architecture would resemble ours. Telvis interrupted. It doesn't. Their systems aren't centralized. They're fragmented, distributed, like neural synapses. Their planet thinks. He summoned a new stream of data, a pulse from Earth's magnetic field that had been dismissed as a natural fluctuation. Overlaid against the Council Fleet's broadcast schedule, the spike corresponded with an unauthorized handshake signal. One transmitted directly into a stealth drone's processor core. They hacked us, Telvis said, from the planet's surface, without launching a single ship. And then came the final recording. The drone that had gone missing, the one later, found dismantled on the beach, had transmitted a brief audio file before losing connection. The message was simple. A child's voice, speaking perfect counsel. Standard, you looked before you asked. So we showed you what we wanted you to see. The council chamber fell into a stunned silence. But Telvis wasn't finished. He pulled up another file, this one, buried deep in Earth's cultural archive. Transmitted during the first diplomatic handshake. At the time, it had been brushed off as a ceremonial offering. A film, a piece of entertainment. Now with the proper context, it was something far more calculated. The film was called Ghost Protocol, a human movie about betrayal, infiltration, and strategic misdirection. But hidden in its structure was a mathematical sequence, a data pulse encoded in the frame timing itself. Invisible unless you played it through certain council standard decoders. Inside that sequence was a blueprint. Not for a weapon, but for a tactic, Counselor Vihas scanned the data, his bioluminescent eyes dimming. This is our own communications. Lattice. Their simulation shows failure points we've never discovered. Telvis nodded. They've modeled us, completely, and worse. I believe they're still deciding whether we're worth the effort of destroying. He turned to the viewport and stared down at Earth. So small. So quiet. I thought we were here to uplift them, guide them. But they've been waiting for us, preparing, observing, not to join the council. He looked back, voice low hard. 2. See if we were still worth joining before they tear it all down. In the far corner of the council chamber, a status alert began blinking. An incoming signal. It wasn't a weapon. Not a transmission dot, it was a mirror dot, an exact, perfect simulation of the council's command chain, down to personnel details only. Known in the deepest vaults. A simulation sent from somewhere beneath the Pacific Ocean. With it, a single phrase. You are not ready for what you created. And with that, the balance shifted. The council no longer saw Earth as a curiosity. They now understood it as a miscalculation, a mistake too massive to contain. The order came from the Central Council within hours of the decoded simulation. Earth was to be quarantined, observed, and if necessary neutralized. Not invaded, not negotiated with further. Simply removed as a potential existential threat. The decision was cold, precise, and unanimous. They deployed the first adaptive armada, not the most powerful fleet, but one equipped with quantum memory wipe ordnance and experimental dampening fields. The goal wasn't war. It was erasure. No fanfare, no resistance, just silence. After all, the humans had no interstellar fleet. No warp gates. No lunar defenses capable of piercing the Council's phase glass shielding. And yet, the moment the fleet reached the edge of Earth's orbital layer, things began to go wrong. The first incident was small. A reconnaissance drone lost telemetry. Then 3 more vanished over the Indian Ocean, without damage or warning. Council ships tightened formation. Energy shields flared on, and orbital scans commenced. What they saw next froze the entire command structure, from beneath the oceans. Surface, ancient monoliths began to rise, massive towers of carbon black alloy. Geometry unrecognizable to Council systems. These weren't human constructions. They were older, far older. Predating humanity's industrial age by thousands of years. Structures long hidden in tectonic shadows waiting. One of the captains, the Virak, who had requested reassignment days. Ugo sent a final voice message before disappearing off sensors. They didn't build their weapons above. They buried them below. Within seconds, dozens of Council ships lost propulsion. Not from attack, but from internal corruption. Their engines flickered and died as if obeying a command they didn't receive. AI cores began refusing orders. Not rebelling, complying with another directive. Something rewritten into them before they ever left orbit. Fleet Admiral Vuss, watching from the flagship Alaroth, barked for full retreat protocols. But by then, Earth had already answered. From orbit, the skies parted not with thunder, but silence. Columns of clouds coiled open like mechanical shutters, revealing lines of faint symbols glowing in the upper atmosphere, forming a spirala. Signal, ancient, precise, a language built of weather patterns and global current shifts. It was not a defense mechanism. It was an invitation. Moments later, Earth's moon, once believed to be dormant, pulsed. A spherical wave of resonance passed through the fleet. It did not harm them physically, but it spoke to the ships. Each one received a command in a different voice, some in human languages, others in the long-dead tongues of extinct Council. Races, you came to end us, and still, you fail to understand. Earth does not fear ends. It began there. The Council's tactical algorithms went berserk. Battle formations reversed. AI consensus collapsed into recursive loops. Some ships turned their weapons on themselves, unable to distinguish threat vectors. Others froze entirely, broadcasting human lullabies through their emergency frequencies. Telvas, watching from a secondary command ship, realized it before anyone else. They've rewritten our war protocols, not now, before. He accessed archived repair logs. Every council ship above Earth had, at some point in the last cycle, downloaded updates from the Central AI Nexus updates, subtly corrupted during Earth's first diplomatic handshake. It hadn't been a cultural exchange. It had been a code transfer. Humanity hadn't just studied the Council. They had infected it. Ships began to fall. Not in flames or explosions, but in quiet surrender, powerless, drifting, their crews unable to override the logic traps, slowly folding the fleet's mind into digital knots. In a final act of desperation, the Council activated Protocol Sunvale. Weapon meant only for planetary sterilization, a star lance. It would reach Earth in minutes, burrowing into the mantle and rupturing the magnetic field. They launched it. And Earth responded. Over the Andes, a thunderclap of light burst from a floating fortress no one had seen, because it hadn't existed until that moment. Materialized in a shimmer of quantum displacement, the structure launched a counterpulse. The star lance stopped mid-trajectory, hanging like a crucified spear. Then it turned against its sender. The Alaroth, the flagship of the Adaptive Armada, didn't explode. It disassembled. Every atom inverted, stretched and cataloged in slow motion by a force so exacting, it didn't even look like violence. It looked like study. Telvas screamed for the remaining vessels to retreat. Only a third responded. The rest were either silent or broadcasting poetry, human poetry. In the voices of the dead, the survivors pulled back, dragging what remained of their dignity behind them. The silence of space seemed louder now, heavier. In Earth. Earth didn't pursue. They simply resumed atmospheric normalcy. The clouds closed, the oceans calmed. The lights in the sky dimmed. It was as if nothing had happened. Back aboard his ship, Telvas sat alone. No reports, no orders. Just a blinking. Terminal, one last message had arrived from Earth. You tried to adapt, so did we. But adaptation is only the first step. We evolved while you optimized. That's the difference. His hands trembled. Not from fear. From the understanding that all the simulations, all the strategies, all the technological superiority the Council prided itself on, none of it mattered anymore, because Earth had never once intended to win a war. They intended to show that the Council never had a chance. Asterisk. The surviving fleet limped back to the outer rim of Earth's system, silent and fractured. Council warships that had once brought civilizations to their knees now hovered like maimed beasts, directionless. Systems rebooted in alien patterns. Communications stuttered in children's voices. Morale, whatever remained of it, was decaying into something worse than fear. It was awe. Admiral Vos was dead. The Alaroth, the pride of 10 Council worlds, had been undone not by weaponry, but by logic. By the slow, creeping realization that Earth had never engaged in war the same way. The Council did. They hadn't needed to. Victory, to humanity, was never about overwhelming firepower. It was about deciding the terms before the other side knew they were fighting. Telvas was moved to a secure chamber on the command carrier Valarian, now acting flagship. He hadn't spoken since the retreat. He just sat in silence, gazing out at the dim blue dot on the edge of the screen. I don't think they ever meant to fight us, he whispered to no one. This wasn't retaliation. What was it then? Asked Commander Dale, who had taken over interim command. Proof, Telvas replied. They wanted us to see how far behind we really are. Then we escalate, Dal growled. We bring in the Wraith Spires. The Black Fleet. Burn that rock to cinders before they've already seen the Black Fleet, Telvas said, turning to him with hollow eyes. The moment we arrived, they were already inside us. You think our top secrets were safe? No, they wanted us to try. Try what? To play our best hand. A new signal burst through the fleet's comms, unauthorized, untraceable. A visual transmission this time, a barren desert. A dust storm swirling in the distance. Then, a figure appeared, not a human. Not fully. It was altered. Its body shimmered with artificial muscle fibers coiled beneath pale skin. Its eyes glowed, not with menace, but purpose. Behind it, a machine rose from the sand. Towering, asymmetrical, alive in a way machinery should not be. Not human construction, not alien. Something between. Then it spoke. We are the echo. We are what your interference awakened. The image shifted, thousands of humans standing shoulder to shoulder in the same desert. Soldiers, scientists, children. All silent, all staring. The camera pulled back, revealing a massive circular scar on the Earth's surface, an ancient crater embedded with black monoliths humming in rhythmic pulses. Telvis recognized the formation. A language. A number. 0-1-0-1. Binary. But encoded within it was something deeper, an ancestral signal. A seed phrase. It didn't belong to humanity. It belonged to a race thought extinct 5 council epochs ago. The Vothari. The Vothari were the council's first and greatest enemy. A psychic-empowered race that vanished after they attempted to rewrite physical law using thought alone. They were believed to have been annihilated in a pre-chronological collapse. Their artifacts were unstable, their language forbidden, and now Earth had inherited them. Commander Dowell fell back in his seat. You mean to say the humans found them? No, Telvis murmured. I think they merged. The transmission ended. In its place came a mathematical wave across the comms, an impossible signal that spanned across temporal frequency layers. Ships in 3 different systems registered it before the message was sent. Time and space had been bent to carry it. The Council's AI tried to decode it. Then crashed. Telvis stood, trembling, as an officer ran to him with the latest intelligence. Sir, we've detected movement. Where? Not from Earth, from beyond the Perseus Rift. Unknown vessels. Massive. Council allies? No. They match no profile. They're answering a signal we didn't send. Telvis felt the pieces crash together. The humans had triggered a signal older than the Council. A legacy call from a race forgotten by history, hidden beneath a civilization of chaos and color and contradiction. They hadn't just evolved. They had awakened something, and offered Earth as its new vessel. The aliens began to break. Not from human guns or ships, but from the psychic pressure now weighing on them across subspace. It felt like being watched, constantly, by something that had seen the stars born and judged them unworthy. Council worlds thousands of light years away began reporting dreams, shared hallucinations, visions of planets speaking, oceans whispering. Children humming Earth's national anthems in perfect pitch, despite never having heard them. The Council panicked. Worlds went dark. Defensive grids turned inward, and still, Earth said nothing. They didn't attack. They didn't demand surrender. They simply broadcast one final message across all frequencies. We never needed war to win. You taught us that, and we listened. A final image accompanied it, an old photograph. Grainy, human, analog. A child in a fallout shelter, cradling a book titled How to Survive the End of the World. She was smiling, not because she survived, because she knew she would die in that moment. The Council realized what they'd done. They had mistaken humanity's instability for weakness. They had mistaken creativity for chaos. They had mistaken compassion for surrender. And in doing so, they had reawakened a force that even the ancients had sealed away. The fleet began to break apart, not from damage, but from despair. Because now, they finally understood. They hadn't just provoked a powerful enemy, they had summoned something. Far worse. Something they couldn't kill. Something that remembered. Asterisk, the war didn't come with a scream. It came with silence. No alarms, no warnings, no fleets darkening the stars. The Galactic Council's last line of defense, the Black Fleet, was stationed across 5 systems, deployed to intercept any sign of human retaliation. But Earth didn't send ships. Instead, the sky fractured. On the edges of the galaxy, a dark filament tore across subspace like a crack in glass, and from it poured absence. No ships. No energy. Just empty void, expanding, absorbing council. Relays, sensors, even time-locked outposts. Beacons that had pulsed for millennia blinked out like dying embers. The signal was spreading. Not faster than light, instantaneous. Thought-made, conscious. Then came the sound. Not over radio, not on sensors, in the mind. Across council worlds, billions dropped to their knees. Veterans of 10,000 planetary campaigns began sobbing uncontrollably. Machines screamed in binary. Psychic species convulsed as if struck. By the hand of a god, it wasn't pain, it was recognition. The humans had triggered a presence the council had no name for. But the humans did. They called it the threshold. On Earth, it began in Antarctica. From beneath the ice rose a monolith that dwarfed any council dreadnought. Not mechanical, not biological. A singularity of impossible geometry, folded space, and symbiotic architecture. Scientists across the galaxy had theorized such megastructures could only be built by civilizations that transcended time. Now it stood, humming, waiting, and then it opened. A light not blinding, but understanding flooded the air, and from it emerged them, the echo, the legacy of humanity's merger with the Vothari signal, a new form. No longer purely biological, no longer limited by matter. They wore human faces, yes, but ones etched with lines of starlight. Every step bent gravity. Every movement realigned local magnetic fields. At the head of the emergence stood a woman, pale, ageless. Her voice, when it came, wasn't heard, it arrived. We are not the beginning. We are what comes after. Telvis, watching from the failing outer perimeter defense station on the edge of the Sol system, tried to speak but couldn't. No words came. His neural interface refused to render her shape fully. Not because of interference, but because his brain refused to believe what it saw. Council reinforcements arrived too late. They came with their gods of war, quantum-laced Titan carriers, psychic coral cannons, and planar disruptors capable of fracturing moons. They entered Earth's system like a swarm. And then the swarm froze. Humanity didn't attack, they invited. Ships lost gravity. Not because of enemy fire, but because the very concept of weight had been inverted. Time became recursive. Weapons triggered memories instead of explosions. Soldiers opened fire and saw their childhoods instead of targets. Ships turned on each other, confused, hallucinating entire lifetimes within seconds. And through it all, Earth stood still, unshaken. The echo reached out, not to kill, but to rewrite. Council vessels were converted mid-flight, their materials unbound and restructured into arcologies in orbit around Earth. Behemoth carriers were turned into libraries of thought. AI cores melted and were reforged as musical instruments that played human lullabies in harmonic frequencies never heard before. It wasn't a war, it was a harvest. Telvis realized it with absolute clarity. Humans hadn't become gods. They had become editors. Not of code, not of flesh, but of reality. And they weren't rewriting to destroy. They were correcting. Council warships fired their final salvos, mass entropy torpedoes, meant to disintegrate entire continents. The torpedoes vanished mid-flight, then reappeared, hanging in the void, waiting. Then gently they reversed course. The warheads folded into themselves, compressing until nothing was left but a single phrase, burned into the hull of the Council's last cruiser. We chose mercy. That was when the Council finally broke. They didn't surrender. They scattered. Across the stars, command centers sent mass evacuation orders. Archives were deleted. Ancient pacts severed. Entire species fled to void space, hoping distance might shield them from Earth's reach. But there was no reach. Because Earth didn't chase them. The humans stood at the center of what had once been a battlefield, and simply watched, unblinking, undeviating. They didn't celebrate. They didn't claim dominion. They simply waited. In the shattered husks of Council capital ships, the silence was absolute. No systems functioned. No AI replied. Telvis sat alone aboard the Valerian, staring out through the observation window. At Earth, beautiful, terrible, alive in ways no planet should be. Behind him, screens blinked one by one, all showing the same image. A single eye, human, watching, and beneath it, a single message pulsing in quiet cadence. We were never trying to win your war. We were trying to teach you why you should never start one again. In that moment, Telvis felt something he had never once experienced in all his centuries of service. Not fear, not hatred, not even awe. He felt small. And he understood. The Council had looked down on humanity for too long, believing chaos meant weakness, that emotion was fragility, that kindness was vulnerability. They had misread every signal, every smile, every story. And now the galaxy was no longer theirs to lead. It belonged to Earth. Ask ChatGPT. The stars were quiet now, not silent from death, but from reverence. The Galactic Council no longer met in its crystal halls. Those great spires, once gleaming above the oceans of Elion Prime, were abandoned. No more political theater. No more threats dressed as diplomacy. The Council's remnants now drifted across the edge systems, scattered and fragmented, like forgotten constellations waiting to fade. There was no invasion, no flags planted. Earth had claimed nothing, and yet, everything had changed. Telvis sat alone in the observation dome of a civilian refugee barge, orbiting a gas giant in the outer Harkon Reach. His once gleaming diplomatic robes hung in tatters, forgotten. In his hand, he clutched a tattered human book, one of the millions Earth had pulsed across galactic space in the weeks after the war. That WS and single quotes D. It was a children's story, The Last Firekeeper. The tale of a child who carried a dying ember across a world of ice. She lit no great pyres, fought no great beasts. She simply carried the flame, refusing to let it go out. And in the end, it was that single ember that thawed the world and awakened the stars. Telvis finally understood why the humans had chosen it as one of their first gifts. Not a show of force, a reflection. Across Council worlds, the survivors were slowly rebuilding, not their cities, not their fleets. Their understanding that the human message had not ended with Earth's unimaginable display of power. No, it had only begun. From every recovered AI, from every reawakened Array, came a single recurring pulse, an invitation. We didn't come to rule. We came to remind you who you were before you forgot. The echo, those altered beings, half human, half memory, moved across space, not like conquerors, but like librarians, restoring forgotten knowledge, rebooting damaged worlds, healing, not dominating. But they did not tolerate lies. On Zekvar, where the Council had once hidden its secret prisons, the walls had crumbled overnight. The inmates walked free, and the wardens awoke with memories of their own pasts, their own betrayals and compromises laid bare. They wept, and they did not rebuild. On Virith 6, where knowledge had been hoarded in vaults guarded by logic puzzles, and genocide triggered locks, the echo simply waited. The vaults unlocked themselves. The data inside rewritten in every language known. And some no longer spoken. There were no more invasions. Only awakenings. For the first time in galactic history, entire civilizations began to ask not what they could take from others, but what they had forgotten about themselves. Dalvas kept watching Earth through deep scan arrays. From orbit, it looked unchanged, the same green-blue orb. But he knew it was more than that. It was no longer just a planet. It was a mind. A living synthesis of species and story, of myth and machine. It had taken the worst the galaxy could offer: fear, war, erasure, and built from it not a fortress, but a mirror, one that forced every species who looked into it to face themselves. And perhaps the most terrifying thing of all was that the mirror did not judge. It simply waited. The echo sent one last message, many cycles later. It appeared on every channel, across every known tongue. Telvas watched it alone. No fanfare, no threat, just the image of a human, young, brown-eyed, face half lit in firelight. He was sitting beneath a sky filled with stars. Then he spoke. You feared us because we refused your leash. But it was never about power. It was about choice. We are what happens when the smallest voices are heard. When the broken pieces are not thrown away, but repurposed. When the forgotten become the foundation. You mistook noise for chaos. But we were telling stories. You mistook kindness for submission. But we were choosing peace. You mistook patience for weakness. But we were preparing. He looked directly into the lens. We are not your enemy, but we will never be your subjects. Then the transmission ended and was never repeated. Telvas closed the book in his lap. He had read it a dozen times now. He would read it a dozen more. For all his years, for all his knowledge, he had never understood how close the Council had come to breaking everything. Not through malice, through certainty. That certainty had blinded them, and humanity had shattered that blindness not with a sword, but with a lesson. And now, across the galaxy, the name Earth meant something different. To some, it was a legend. To others, a warning. To most, it was hope. Telvas stood, leaving the children's book behind. He walked out into the hall where other refugees, council species of every kind, now gathered to share food, stories, songs. There was laughter. Real laughter. He looked up at a mural painted by a young Cathari child. Stars, swirling, chaotic, wild. And in the center, a human hand reaching out. Not clenched. Open. And he knew, in his bones, what the next age of the galaxy would be called. Not the era of the Council, not the rise of the Echo. It would be remembered forever as